as you are able, for the reading of the gospel. Our gospel comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew, the 5th chapter, beginning with the first verse. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Well, brothers and sisters in Christ, grace and peace to you in this season of light and growth after Epiphany. Amen. Now, this Sunday was quite an event, wasn't it? The date was 02/02/2020, which is a palindrome. It's the same forward as backwards. It only happened, the last time it happened was 900 years ago. So that Sunday was one of those once-in-a-lifetime events. But some different counting. Sunday was 40 days since Christmas. Now, 40 days is rather significant in the Bible, and in this particular case, 40 days, we're told in the Gospel of Luke, was when Jesus is taken to the temple by Mary and Joseph for the presentation. They were to present Jesus before God and then redeem him, buy him back from God, because the firstborn of Israel belonged to God because of what had happened to the firstborn of Egypt. So these echoes of the Exodus story are there. And I love the story in Luke because you see Simeon who comes up and recognizes this tiny little 40-day-old baby as God's Redeemer and breaks out into a song and prayer of promise. And that story begins to unfold, that Exodus story. Now, one of the most valuable lessons I learned was in college freshman chemistry. This is one of my really great stories. So when I got sick on Sunday, I asked Pastor Craig yesterday, I said, "Oh, did you have to use my story?" He said, "No, I have my own story that's just like it." So both Pastor Craig and I have similar stories. So this is the truth, according to Pastor Craig and Pastor Julie, right? But I'm going to save you kids a lot of money. And parents, maybe you too. When you go to college, you spend a crazy amount of money on books, and you want to get the most out of them. So Phil Bujak told us what to do. There's 3 things you should do. I can never get 3. 3 things you should do when you get a new book. You should always read the introduction or the foreword, for it tells you the purpose of the book. It gives you hints on how the book is structured and what you should look out for. And it might even tell you if there's some little tricks and hints and aids in there for you. Always, always, always scan the table of contents. It's like getting an overview of what's to come. So maybe when you hit a spot that you're kind of frustrated, you go, "Wait a minute, okay, that's coming up in a later chapter. I don't have to obsess about it." Also, look at the end. Are there maps and bibliographies and dictionaries and maybe study questions that can help you get the most out of that book? The third thing is, if there are footnotes, graphs, artwork, any kind of charts, look at them. I did well on a test because I looked at the chart and nobody else did one time, because they are expensive to put in and they are there for a reason. Now, why did that story come to mind for me? Because we've been reading Matthew's gospel, I see Matthew giving us these aids. Now, Matthew wrote for us a gospel. It's the telling of the story of Jesus. It's a biography of Jesus with all of these theological themes. Now, we've had 4 chapters of introduction, right? We have been told where Jesus came from and what he came to do. We have been told about foretelling about his birth in Bethlehem, the visit of the wise men, the escape to Egypt at the threat of a king, the return to Jerusalem, Jesus' baptism by John, the temptation in the wilderness. Oh boy, there's something familiar about how Matthew is telling Jesus' story. It too carries those echoes of the Exodus story, the core story of the chosen people of God. It's the story that has been repeated in some way or shape or form over and over again in the Old Testament. And now it comes to us in the New Testament, but in a whole new way. Jesus has called his first disciples and has made a name for himself with his preaching and healing. That's how chapter 4 ends. They go up to this mountain where they can see all that is around them. Mountain, Exodus story, Jesus assumes the posture of a teacher and begins to teach his followers. Like a good teacher, he lays out in an overview what he is about to do. This introductory lecture begins with that outline, that table of contents, what to expect in the upcoming book, the coming attractions of Jesus' ministry. Those first 10 statements are often called the Beatitudes. Now, these Beatitudes are those Bible passages that are probably rather familiar to us, that they are easy to dismiss, even if we don't entirely understand them. But think, those original people, those disciples and the crowd probably had no idea what Jesus was doing. They didn't probably understand it either, but if we reread those words with those fresh eyes that we're reading them for the first time, we might see anew not only the novelty of this message, but the downright craziness of it. One might be justified in asking, and probably one of the followers did, really, Jesus? This is how you're going to take on the mighty Roman Empire? Seriously? For example, what does Jesus mean by blessed? Doesn't what he's talking about as blessing doesn't sound like a blessing. Or what are the meek? What does he mean by meek? Would maybe humble or gentle or powerless might be more accurate words to describe those who receive the blessing of God's kingdom. Or how is one poor in spirit? Wouldn't broken spirituality, in order to be healed or emptied, in order to receive Jesus' teaching, seem clearer? Certainly, pure in heart refers to the heart's location at the center of thought, intention, our moral center. Biblical scholar N.T. Wright put it this way: God doesn't send in the tanks. God sends in the meek, the broken, the justice hungry, the peacemakers, and the pure in heart. In other words, God sends the blessings of God's kingdom because of God's steadfast love for us. Then God sends us out to do God's work in the world, to share this new insight into God. God does not expect extraordinary events or actions from God's people. What God's seeking is simply an openness to the gift of God's presence, his love and guidance. On a mountain, Jesus brings the good stuff, direction and how to live and see life as God's beloved child. Now, what are the special signals, markers in Matthew's gospel? They are these prophecies that are fulfilled. He says, thus was fulfilled. Today, we heard questions that came on one of the other readings for this week is from Micah chapter 6. And perhaps it's these questions that Jesus is answering in the Beatitudes, both from God and from God's people. Now, God asks, "Oh, my people, what have I done to you? And what have I wearied you? Answer me, for I brought you up from the land of Egypt, redeemed you from the house of slavery, that you may know the saving acts of God." Now, you might have heard those before. These words echo to us from Lent, especially from Good Friday. How do we live out that Exodus story today and at Jesus' time? And notice God is a little sarcastic. What did I do? I brought you out of slavery. What are you mad at me for? So the people ask, yeah, is that not the question that forms God's response in the Beatitude? In those times of trouble, God is showing us his loving heart. Now, the question back to God is, "With what then shall I come before you, Lord, and bow myself before God on high?" And we're told it's not with extravagant gestures of worship or sacrifice. Jesus is reminding us that these Beatitudes, like the response of Micah gave from God, he says, "O mortal, what is good and what does God require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." If you like that, that's Micah 6:8. A lot of people use that for their confirmation verse. Hear those again. "O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." Isn't that a summary of those Beatitudes? Jesus now is beginning to reveal the purpose of his life and how we will see the face of God through him. He will show us the way to be right with God and see each other through God's eyes. The Exodus story is retold by the one who will do justice, love kindness, and show us how to walk humbly with God. Let our Exodus journey begin. Amen.